Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your third and final lesson in the university's Archive and Special Collections. As I hope you all remember, I'm Sarah Alcorn, the University Archivist, and we'll go ahead and get this lesson started with the agenda. Again, welcome. And I'm going to go ahead and give a quick introduction, touching on goals and objectives before we begin the lesson. And then we're going to go in with an easy and fun PowerPoint lecture. It'll be riveting, I promise. After the lecture, we'll take a quick break before we reconvene for our exciting scavenger hunt. This hunt will hopefully result in some artifacts of what you will be analyzing and writing about in the essay. Don't worry, the essay is not hard and it's only for a small grade. After the essay, we'll do about a quick 15-minute discussion in groups for our wrap-up, and you'll be out of here 40 minutes earlier than your regularly scheduled class time. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and start with our goal questions. So I'll be asking you questions. Feel free to raise your hand and answer. What is a primary source? How do you find a primary source? How can a primary source be helpful in research? And what makes a good primary source? So we'll go ahead and do the student objectives. So the student objectives are the things that you will be learning throughout this class period. First, your students will be retrieving primary sources. You will then analyze those primary sources. You'll be evaluating those primary sources by investigating its content. And then students will create new research questions based on the evaluation of those primary sources. So all of those student objectives are really great. But first of all, we need to focus on what is a primary source. So a primary source provides direct, first-hand evidence about an event, object, person, place, or time period. It serves as an original source of information on a topic. These sources can range from football programs like you see on the left to photographs like you see on the bottom left, newspaper articles such as this official article of the United States at War, letters, pamphlets, video and audio files. For example, if your subject is a history of the university's marching band, a video file of the marching band's halftime show from 1954 would be a primary source, or an audio file of a university president giving a commencement speech. So now that we know what primary sources are, the question is, what really is the difference between primary and secondary sources? I'll go ahead and show this quick YouTube video that gives a really great explanation of what the difference between primary and secondary sources are.
The content of your research project will be made up of primary and secondary sources. Primary and secondary sources come in many different formats, and there are benefits for referencing both types in your assignment. It can be difficult to figure out if a source is considered primary or secondary, but don't worry, because we'll explain the differences here so that you can decide which are best to use in your assignment. Primary sources are first-hand accounts of an event, topic, or historical time period. Anything that contains original information on a topic is considered a primary source. Examples of primary sources include things like letters or personal diaries or journals, original photographs, speeches, newspaper reports, creative works like paintings, plays, and music, and research data or surveys. It's a good idea to use primary sources in research papers because it allows you to form your own argument to defend your thesis, since the information you're using is unfiltered by another person's point of view. You're able to critique an original work using your own ideas. Secondary sources interpret, critique, or analyze primary sources. It is information that is created or published from primary sources. Examples of secondary sources include things like textbooks, essays or reviews, encyclopedias, newspaper articles that analyze or discuss events and ideas, and criticisms and commentaries. It's a good idea to use secondary sources in research papers because you can learn about new perspectives that you may not have even considered, and they can also strengthen your own argument in the assignment. For example, if you're writing a history paper about how the diversity of a city shifted during a certain time period, you could use data from the U.S. Census Bureau to compare populations across the decades. This type of information would be considered a primary source, as it's data that's simply been collected and compiled. There is no analysis. That's what you'll be doing in the paper. For the same topic, you could also use an article from a newspaper that reviews the data and draws conclusions or analysis from it, such as other ways in which the population might change or grow over time. Some sources, like scholarly journals and newspapers, can serve as both a primary and a secondary source, depending on which article you're reading. Articles that include things like eyewitness accounts or interviews and are published close to the time of the event you're researching would be a primary source. Articles that are published after the fact and include analysis or critiques are secondary sources. Primary and secondary sources can both strengthen and improve your research immensely by providing you with information to create an argument and defend your thesis statement. Now that you know how to differentiate between them, try using them in your own assignment.
So now that we know the difference between a primary and a secondary source, what makes a good primary source? Being able to figure out if a primary source is a good or useful source is as simple as employing the 5 W's in H. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. What is your item? Who created or used this? When was it created? Where was it created? Why was it created? And how is this important to your research? If you're able to identify all these questions in context to your research question, that makes a great primary source. For example, the picture on the right is a photograph. It was created by a reporter from the Omaha World Herald, and it was used in a newspaper article. It was taken in 1936 to depict the president's visit to Omaha. If my topic was the presidential history of Omaha, Nebraska, this photograph would be perfect. What is cultural capital? Cultural capital, for this use, means an object when it has symbolism, significance, and value, but not necessarily financial value. This is important for this type of historical research, as sometimes our topics can bring a large amount of historical artifacts, but may not always be important. If your topic focuses on a university president, your search is going to retrieve hundreds of artifacts. While the correspondence between the university president and his secretary about Christmas lunch may be interesting, it holds no cultural capital to it. It has no significance to the university's cultural atmosphere and has no value besides the president's affinity for yams. While a primary source may have no monetary value, its information and story may have cultural significance. As a primary source can also hold cultural symbolism, such as this poem and painting on the right. Written and published in the university's poetry newsletter in 1973, this poem and art shows the possible symbolism surrounding the campus culture and environment during the Vietnam War. So now that we know what a primary source is, how can we use primary sources in research? We're going to look at analyzing and evaluating. First, you have to use your research question. In our last lesson, you created research questions for your topic. This research question is going to be your guide throughout the analyzing and evaluating process. Use this research question to look at the object from historical context. Does it tell the time period's ideology? Does this object use language that could give you an idea about how people thought during that time period? Whose perspective is it from? Who created this object? Is it a woman using a man's pen name because women authors weren't accepted? What does this tell you about the historical implication? What does this perspective say about history, about the time period, about the culture? Relate these questions back to your research. Does it answer your research question, or even part of the question? Everyone starts their research with preconceived notions. Does this object support your original theory? Does it destroy it? For example, are you trying to argue that the Oglala Indian tribe held only land in North Dakota? If so, the object on the left, this treaty for land giving the Oglala Indians territory in western Nebraska, would absolutely destroy that theory. Because everyone starts their research with preconceived notions, everyone has the opportunity to use the research to bash or support those notions. By using your research question, you'll be able to guide these questions in a way that's going to help your research become. So why use primary resources? The obvious answer is to support your research. Using primary sources is going to give you an extra added influence on what you're trying to say in your research. There are a few reasons exactly why we're trying to use primary resources. The first is the first-hand accounts. They provide you with the power of interpretation. You are the person writing this research paper, so you are in control of the primary source analysis. The second is unfiltered information. Unfiltered information means that nothing is being censored or taken away, for better or for worse. Using a primary source gives you a real view on historical events, rather than a textbook or author's view that might be trying to hide hard or unpleasant information. Personal connections can be made through primary resources, making the historical context of a topic mean more than just general facts. Providing a personal connection in research can give your paper more significance and value, and in turn, more cultural capital. By using a primary source from multiple perspectives can create your knowledge as well as the reader's, and increase what your understanding is on a topic. That topic may have been researched through only one specific perspective, and opening perspectives can add to both personal connections and significance. All right, does anyone have any quick questions about the primary sources before we dig into the archival databases? Nope. Okay. Great. So the University of Nebraska has two types of online databases that you can use. Both can be accessed at home and off campus and used for research. The first is Archon database. This is used for finding the physical location of an object within the archive through a finding aid. A finding aid will give you the exact location down to the item number and will be a more complete list of the university's holdings. If there is an online digital record of the artifact, it will provide you with a link. This link will take you to Nebraska U. Nebraska U uses Content DM to provide an open source database to digitally preserve collections. These collections can all be viewed online. Nebraska U features online digital exhibits of artifacts held within the archives. This is especially useful if you have a keyword that you want to browse, as thumbnails of the artifacts can be viewed through searching. So in our last lesson, we talked and learned about vocabulary and the language and search techniques when doing regular internet searches and database searches. Most of those techniques can be applied within these two databases. So those search techniques that we touched on last time were the Boolean search techniques and Boolean operators, such as and, which narrows, or, which broadens, not, which eliminates. We also touched on using quotes for phrases. So as you can see, I use quotes around the Extra Point Club. This brought me to an Extra Point Club member card. That's an easy way to find a phrase in the artifacts. You also want to use the built-in search options, such as keywords, item titles, item descriptions, date range, and words such as contains or does not contain. This is going to be the best way for you to search through both databases and find things that you're looking for. All right, now that we learned about primary sources and we quickly reviewed research topics, we're ready to go into our scavenger hunt. But before we break, does anyone have any questions? I also want to quickly discuss how we're feeling about being ready to search and really begin our searching through our databases. How do you feel about researching? What do you feel needs more clarification? Is there a certain part of this lesson that you feel I didn't expand enough on? Are there any other questions? What about comments? All right, we'll take a 5-minute break. You should be back with your research questions and ready to head to the databases. Here is a quick list of all of my references. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you back here in 5 minutes, ready to start our scavenger hunt.